just don't really think that you can tell the difference between rich and wealthy based off a Toyota versus a Ferrari.
Right. It's really how long does your detail take to eat at McDonald's when you go eat at McDonald's with the common folk, the proletariat. We like
As we all do. Do
McDonald's.
they have truffles yet at McDonald's, or is that
At
just a
certain
McDonald's I
ones,
go
right?
to?
That's like the truffle royale.
Truffle Royale with cheese. I love it. Welcome to Coffee Talk with Serge, where we discuss such hard-hitting subjects as Toyotas versus Ferraris. Which one would you have if you were wealthy? As always, we do about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how feisty we get. Although I think today's trending more towards 30 with all the wonderful news that Audra's provided. My name's Ryan Kovar, Audra Streetman, Mick Baccio, and we're here to talk about the things that are occurring, do some charity challenges, and then a deep dive. But as always, we like to start off with some wonderful news around the world. So why don't we start off that segment? We got some new exciting things for everyone today.
I love that.
Over to you, Audra.
So newsy. And by the way, Ryan edited that, so pretty impressive. All right, so news this morning, or I guess evening, afternoon, wherever you are. So Twitter's former head of security is going to testify in a Senate hearing next month. This is after filing a complaint alleging security and privacy vulnerabilities, claiming that Twitter poses a threat to user data, investors, and national security. So this former head of security is Peter Zatko. He's also known as Mudge by many people in the cybersecurity industry. So he was fired in January for what Twitter's calling ineffective leadership and poor performance. But Zatko says he was fired in retaliation for raising these concerns. So he's saying that Twitter ran vulnerable, outdated software and that employees had poorly controlled access to some of the company's systems. So according to this complaint, Twitter may have also violated a 2011 consent decree with the FTC over user data collection used for marketing. We're definitely going to talk about data collection in a little bit. And so this testimony is set for September 13th. That is the same day that Twitter shareholders actually plan to vote on whether or not to approve Elon Musk's takeover deal. So Musk wants to terminate this deal because he claims that Twitter misstated the prevalence of spam and bots on the platform, which is also a concern that was raised by Zatko in this complaint. So the shareholder vote, it could serve as leverage in Twitter's legal fight to go along with this takeover deal. And a trial for that, I believe, is expected in October. So a lot has happened there with the Twitter security concerns, and I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts.
Yeah, I'm gonna start off here saying I asked that we're gonna go a slightly different direction, partly because, we as always we never victim blame. There's a lot of complicated things. I actually worked with Mudge at DARPA. There were a lot of things there. He's well known in the industry, and the man's a multimillionaire already, so he doesn't need a lot of background. But what I am curious about, like, if you take this from a point of view of you're a company, and Mick will tie on your CISO side, like, how do you deal with large-scale security issues in a company that's so dynamic? And I think that's part of what I find fascinating about this is kind of going through it. Like, everyone's saying, Mudge was the head of security, but there's also a CISO, and she was a very good CISO. It was difficult to tell which area of responsibility went or didn't, but, like, I'm really interested just in the concept of how do you deal with this from a CISO point of view or a security org point of view? And Mick, having, been a CISO for a while, how did you think about that?
First, I am super excited. The only thing I can't wait for besides that September 13th date is when the Netflix series is going to come out. Because, again, not the victim blame or anything like that, but just all the moving pieces inside of this are amazing. There are just security issues. There's national security issues at play. There are so many different things. And when you are in an organization that size, something that big like Twitter, if I'm Mudge, you brought me in for a reason. Here are my recommendations. Here's why I'm making these recommendations. And here is what will happen or could potentially happen if we don't implement them. Really, that's your job as a CISO. Your job as any security professional is just that risk management. So you present what you have to present. Either those changes get made or they don't. And you kind of feel like you can stick around, you can't stick around. And I think we're kind of seeing the after effects of that. I'm kind of waiting for a lot of the detail. I think we're we're hearing about. I'm waiting for that detail to come out. I think the biggest thing for me, having really kind of grow up in the federal side as well as the information, the hacker scene, is the discredit attempt is kind of standard SOP, right? When something like this happens, but that's Mudge. I think Mudge is probably the most credible person next to Jeff Moss in the culture. So
I'd say more so because he
right, those attempts
walked both
went
sides.
nowhere.
He went black and white, right? So
Right,
perhaps
all the way back to Loft. It's amazing. So if there's a security issue that he's bringing your attention, I think he's there for a reason, right? You have to listen to that voice.
Now, Audra, you've covered news stories before. I mean, I look at this from my background, and which is similar to Mick's, but I didn't really read anything as bad as this sounds. Like, I didn't read much that Mudge talked about that I wouldn't necessarily expect to find at any major company. I think Twitter gets a lot more focus, a lot more news. I mean, being a communication vessel for the president for 4 years. I mean, there's certain aspects there that are unique, but like for your
I would
survey,
say 4 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. But like, Audra, did you see anything there that stuck out from a journalist point of view?
Well, I think, Twitter obviously serves as a very important platform for information, and that includes misinformation, disinformation, and bots play a big role in that. And that's one of the key issues with Elon Musk's takeover deal. And then also it was an issue raised in this complaint. So I'm interested to see what comes out of this testimony in terms of, that issue. And then also something that stood out to me too was a claim that Twitter has foreign spies on the payroll, which is actually, there's some truth to that. Because just a few weeks ago, a former Twitter employee was using Twitter to spy for Saudi Arabia. So the fact that we're seeing some of these allegations with truth behind it in some aspects, I'm interested to see what more we might gain from the investigation into that. So I am interested to see what happens. And, it was a 200-page complaint, so there was a lot of information. And to be honest, I skimmed over it because it's a lot of information. So I'm curious to see what headlines come out of it in the future.
What else do we have on the agenda?
So this is interesting. Group IB, which is a cybersecurity firm, published a blog about a phishing campaign that's targeting Okta identity credentials. They're calling this Roasting Oktapus. So one of the impacted organizations, Twilio, confirmed that 163 of its customers were compromised, including 2FA app Authy and the food delivery company DoorDash. And they also, Signal said that it was also affected by this. That's the encrypted messaging app. And we talked about that in the last show. So some of these employees, according to this research, they received a text message with a link to phishing sites mimicking the Okta authentication page. So from there, the attackers could get the 2FA codes and then also the Okta identity credentials so that they could access whatever enterprise resources that user has access to. And they were able to pivot, and it became, supply chain. They were able to compromise Twilio and then companies from there. So it's interesting to learn more about this campaign because it does appear to be a somewhat simple phishing campaign, and but it affected so many large companies.
There's some work done on this where we kind of were looking through, and what's fascinating about this is that it's really all about intrusion brokers, right? And I know that's something we've talked about before. It's really like, what are they going to do with this? These groups that are doing the phishing and the 2FA, like it's really more about just getting access for something else or selling that on, right? And Group IB did a good job on the write-up. I feel bad, Okta, they're just in the news a lot lately. I'm sure they're waking up every morning with some sadness, but I didn't see anything that was really bad against Okta. It just felt like people were using, like, it was human hacking, not technology hacking, right? So SMS, I guess that's the big question. We'll talk about this a little bit for the deep dive, but like, Mick, we talk a lot about MFA. Is SMS now the step too far? Like, that's just not good enough? Or is it continue using because it's better than none?
Right, here's the legal answer. It depends. I would say for your corporate authentication, things like that, we need to move to a stronger model. I guess we'll get into that with our little 60-second challenge later. This is amazing to me in its scope, and I think the reporting is still ongoing. Group IB did a fantastic job in this report, which is an odd thing to say out loud. But it just goes to show, I don't think Okta is really to blame per se. It's just Okta is a huge provider, and underneath that umbrella are just so many different organizations you can compromise. If you had, Splunk.okta.com, or you're going to click on that, and just the run a DNS twist on any of the domains out there, and you'll see how easy it is to spoof something like that. And just to stay ahead of it, it's a hard task. I know the reporting, the investigation is still ongoing, and we'll have more information that comes out. But I don't think that it's the death of SMS as 2FA. But I think we should generally move to a stronger model as a whole. And this is just another example of why.
One of the people I talked to over the weekend had a little bit of a cyber barbecue, and they work in crypto companies, and their big take on this was now obviously they have observational bias, like really looking at this as more of a crypto attack, right? Like, because this is intrusion broker 2FA, and kind of their point, which I hadn't really thought about, going to my own bias of being more interested in nation state and APT, was that like money is driving a lot of these attacks, and it's no longer F-35 fighter plane plans. It's how do I get access to a crypto wallet? I'm intrigued by this because of the simplicity. Like you said, Audra, it's a phishing kit, but the hard part was getting the two-factor authentication, right? Yeah. And then after that, it pretty much looks the same.
Pretty simple, yeah.
Yeah, and with phishing, you're hacking the human, and I think that's where it boils down with this type of attack is better education, so that people, when they receive a text message out of the blue, they're maybe a little bit more suspicious, like, oh, I didn't do anything with Okta recently, so why am I getting this text message? I think that could make all the difference with this type of an attack. But as you know, it doesn't always work out that way.
Our punster has dropped in a cyber barbecue. Isn't that known as a fish fry? So well done.
That's good. I don't know. I have to look for. I can't seem to find my invite to that cyber barbecue. I guess it must have gotten lost in the mail. So
yeah,
thank you for that. It's fantastic.
One of the things going through the report for practical takeaways, Mick touched on this for the DNS twist, but like a lot of the targeted domains, people were able to pivot because they just looked for MFA or Okta or Edge or something like that with a prefix. So if you're not looking at your own domain name, if you're not looking at your register or the services you depend on, maybe look at some brand monitoring with somewhere like Domain Tools, or do it yourself with DNS twist, but might pay off some dividends there, and try to find things as they get spun up. My thoughts.
Yeah. All right, time for the ransomware roundup for today.
We need to get like a coin dropping sound.
Ryan, can you edit another video for that, please?
There we go. Well, I'll work on that. Get some coins.
So Montenegro, which is a member of NATO, it says it's dealing with a sophisticated and persistent cyber attack, and this is actually targeting the country's critical infrastructure, electricity, water supply systems, transportation, and also online portals for state services. Several of the power plants there have moved to manual operations, and the state-managed IT infrastructure is completely offline, and that includes the government namespace DNS servers, which is interesting. So the country's defense minister is attributing this attack to Russian actors, but it's also worth noting that the Cuba ransomware group is claiming credit for an attack targeting the parliament of Montenegro's Department for Public Relations. So in terms of attribution, it's a little bit tricky right now, but seems to be a pretty far-reaching cyber attack. Or maybe more than one cyber attack, who knows?
I mean, we do the ransomware roundup for a reason, right? Like, there is no end to this. The Montenegro part is fascinating. I want to dig a little bit into the Lloyd's part, like the cyber insurance. Mick, you had some.
No, I have not been to Montenegro since the mid '90s, and it's weird that there's a different kind of attack happening now. So, but I think it ties really well into the bit about Lloyd's and how cyber insurance is kind of changing slightly.
Right. Yeah. Lloyd's of London, they recently announced, I think this month, that they're going to require insurer groups to exclude catastrophic state-backed cyber attacks from standalone insurance policies. And this is basically insurers working to clarify and tighten the language in its policies. Earlier this year or late last year, a court ruled in favor of the pharmaceutical company Merck in a lawsuit against its insurer over the NotPetya cyber attack ransomware in 2017. And that was a $1.4 billion claim from that attack from Merck. And the court ruled that the warlike action exemption clause in Merck's policy did not apply to NotPetya, which definitely put insurers at risk of future claims like that one. And with the war in Ukraine, that definitely reignited concerns about the possibility of a significant cyber attack where insurers would have to pay out large sums. So basically this new requirement, it excludes losses arising from war, either declared or otherwise. And companies also have to have, it says, robust processes for attribution of attacks, which is tricky because it's hard to know if a criminal group is acting in support of a nation or just as, or as a state agent. So those are two different things that could make a difference with some insurance policies. And, with Montenegro, this is a great example of a cyber attack that could have far-reaching, consequences in terms of damage and finances, money lost. A couple others ransomware attacks we've seen lately. Greece's natural gas operator was hit by Ragnarlocker, and I don't believe they've paid yet. The Dominican Republic is refusing to pay after their agrarian institute was hit by ransomware. I think Quantum Ransomware was claiming responsibility. We had, French police are investigating a ransomware attack on a hospital. I believe that might have been Lockbit, and they had to transfer some patients. And then there was also the ransomware attack affecting the security firm Entrust lately, which there was a DDoS attack against Entrust, which looks to be related to the Entrust hack based on some of the text in that DDoS attack. So definitely a lot happening in the ransomware front and with potentially large financial consequences.
The part that I'm fascinated by this, and part of the reason, Audra, with your brilliant eye for detail, like it was fascinating you pulled out all these nations, because the actual language in the bulletin from Lloyd's is state-based cyber attacks that either significantly impair the ability of a state to function or that significantly impair the security capabilities of a state. Now, you can argue someone like, a defense contractor, or I'll say Lockheed or Raytheon in America, right? If you significantly impair their ability to produce weapons, like I would argue that probably impairs the security capabilities of a state. So I think it's interesting because this has really been in the news a lot where people are like, oh, cyber insurance is dead. But when you really read what they've done, it kind of like, it gives them out for like Costa Rica or Montenegro. Like, we're not going to pay out for that. The comparison I read earlier was like, just like they wouldn't pay out if someone bombed, if this was World War II, it's not like Lloyd's was paying out to recover all of the city of London after the Blitz. It's just an interesting little nugget there of it was so state sponsored and state impaired in emergencies, which I thought was interesting. The question I have is, does this mean the governments, or we'll use the US government because that's where we're located, will they be forced to then come up with cash, kind of like a disaster relief? Just like, if you're in Texas and there's flooding and they have an emergency, this is a national emergency, then they get free federal funding for repairs and such. Do you guys think that's a possibility, Mick, with your background in the government?
Likely, right? There's always money in the banana stand, so I'm sure we'll find something somewhere to give out. I think it's a really interesting angle, and it's not so much applicable here in the U.S., but in a lot of countries where these companies of that size are nationalized, the line between nation-state attack and just cyber attack becomes blurry. And my big thing, having been on the other side of it, there's no such thing as 100% attribution. So you're not going to get like, yep, 100%, it was this person. And you and I know that sometimes the line between espionage and cybercrime is just, whether you're at work or not. So that's going to blur a lot of lines for when they talk about the attribution and payout. And I think it's going to be a really small crowd that it applies to, but it's going to be really, really unique edge cases for those folks.
Now, Audra, when you were in news, you said you used to get like sent out to like hurricane areas or like blizzards and you had to set up your camera. Do you see a world where we're going to be sending you to like New York to go sit in front of like an office building and talk about the new Federal Disaster Act that just unleashed cyber insurance money for, Acme Co?
Oh
Are
yeah,
we going
I
to be?
definitely see, and we've already seen more and more with news coverage, national news coverage, with cybersecurity stories getting a broader reach in terms of who's paying attention to what's happening. So I think, the story that we just mentioned was from, I think, the Wall Street Journal or Washington Post, one of the, national newspapers. So I think that, in the future, it's going to be a much more important issue, especially if there is an attack that has a large impact on the United States, or related to
Another colonial pipeline? I mean, that's the example that comes to me, right? Like
Right.
perfect use case, I'm sure that people in law school are already going through, right? Like colonial pipeline impacted America's ability to function, and you could argue it and impaired security capabilities of state, but the group that did it was a state sheltered, not sponsored, and also not all in Russia, right?
Okay, let me throw one at you. Let's say that it's just a normal factory, but let's say that factory was nationalized under National Defense Production Act, and now it's a different kind of factory that got hit by ransomware. What happens then?
Well, I mean, one thing
And this
there
is
is,
why none of us are lawyers.
yeah, we need to get Bill Wright. Bill Wright, if you're watching, he's a lawyer. He knows policy. We'll do a deep dive on insurance actuarial tables, and we'll watch our viewership just plummet. That's my
Actually,
goal.
probably Bill just reading one page. No, you dum dums. It's actually just this one law from 1802 that says this would happen.
There we
Yeah,
go.
and I think, not Petya, with Russia's initial invasion of Ukraine, obviously that brought with it new cyber attacks on a scale that we hadn't seen before. And then when you look at now with the war in Ukraine, I think that, a lot of governments are putting, contingency plans in place
Yeah.
to prepare for the potential of this. So I think what you're talking about, Ryan, isn't necessarily a future scenario. I think those plans most likely already exist. So we'll see what happens with insurance. And this goes into effect in March, so it doesn't apply to policies currently, but it will in the future.
I do love talking about cyber insurance because I think it's such an interesting bellwether because no one else is better for predicting things than insurance companies, right? Like that's what actuarial tables are, and they don't care about feelings. It's just like, here's the number. Like it'd be interesting for us to have someone on the show who really focuses on this because I feel like every other month or so I vacillate between like everyone's going to have cyber insurance and no one is, and that's the middle tier there.
And clearly, this is the on month. I can tell by
Yes,
the
100%.
enthusiasm that you have. All right. So
Yeah.
next
you'll
month,
have
it's
cyber
stupid.
insurance.
No one needs it. It's dumb.
You'll have it, but how helpful will it be?
Yeah, it's like all the insurance, like getting
It's like
all the insurance I ever
yeah.
buy on things. Like, oh,
Yes.
I'm shipping my bicycle to Las Vegas. I'll get insurance, and then read the fine print. Like, oh, well, your
Right.
bicycle insurance for shipping via air that you bought for that purpose is
It only
actually
covers it
excluded
if
for air cover
this
and
specific
bicycles.
way.
Yeah. Anywho,
All
I
right.
think we're
We have several events coming up that we might want to preview. I think we have a graphic for that. So one thing that we're really excited about, Johan, he's a member of Surge, and he is speaking at an event hosted by Splunk and AWS in Stockholm, which is really exciting. And that's just coming up in a week or so, a couple weeks.
Yeah.
So that's actually going to be about the MITRE ATT&CK framework, I believe he's talking about. And then also Josh Cowling is presenting at the SANS Cyber Threat Summit in London about JAW3 hashes with detecting potential supply chain attacks. And then Ryan, you and Shannon have an exciting talk coming up.
Yeah, we accepted the Microsoft Digital Crimes Conference in Vancouver, which is a huge deal. And we also have another one, right, Mick? You're presenting for the UN in Valencia pretty soon?
Yes, I've been asked to speak at the United Nations Computing Conference in Valencia, I think the first week in October. So Vancouver's not close, but maybe we'll bump into each other. We'll see.
We'll just do V's. Just
Right.
Valencia, Vancouver.
Close enough.
Cool. I think we're ready for our charity countdown. Roll the lovely clip, Lucky. And now, Splunk's Cybersecurity 60-second charity challenge. Remember the rules. You've got to get through an entire subject in 60 seconds, or you donate to today's charity of choice. Good luck! Audra, what are we doing today? What are we talking about? What's our charity?
Sure. So last week, the password manager LastPass notified customers that someone had gained access to their development environment through a compromised account and took portions of the LastPass source code and also some proprietary technical information. They say there's no evidence that any customer data or encrypted password vaults were accessed. But in response to this news, I've seen a lot of people, on Twitter and on social media question whether they should still use a password manager or how concerned they should be about this. So that's my question to both of you for the charity challenge is why do you think password managers are worth using and how concerned should people be about this incident? So who wants to go first?
Well, Mick, I think you've won the last 3 in a row because of disloyal.
Like 300 in a row, really. I mean, who's counting? Who's counting? It just
your choice. Who's first?
Let's go with Ryan.
Ooh, Audra says Ryan.
Command decision.
All right. Lucky, our lovely producer, roll the 60 seconds, and I'll start when I see it. Okay, so the question here is really not do I stop using LastPass, but rather should I still use password managers? Because every company can be breached. And frankly, I think when you're the world's largest password manager, you're going to be targeted a lot. So for me, the question is not do you use LastPass or not? It's do you continue to use a password manager? My answer is 100%. I think they're fantastic. However, you might want to consider a different approach of having different passwords in different vaults. That's a terminology used by 1Pass, for example. I have most of my regular day-to-day passwords for things like Netflix, etc. That's all generated by my password manager in a single location with a very long passphrase. And then I have my sensitive passwords in a second one that uses multi-factor authentication, like an authenticator or YubiKey. This gives me a different basket of eggs while still taking advantage of the convenience of password managers. The value truly outweighs the risk of a breach. And if you're worried, use something like 1Pass with cloud storage where your data is in the cloud but not hosted by a provider.
Hey.
On time departure.
Awesome timing.
There we go.
All right, Mike, are you ready? Are you muted?
I'm ready to go.
Okay.
All right. So LastPass, my one login, need my password, password box, RoboForm, my passwords, Informaticore, Keeper, F-Secure Key, Dashlane, KeepSafe, Avast Passwords, 1Password, and one login. Those are all compromised going back to 2014. I didn't go back farther because I was hungry and I wanted hot dogs, and they were delicious. But see, this breach with LastPass is about source code. So it's either the most terrible thing ever or a big nothing burger like some TV show about dragons. Time will tell. The point here is not to slam password managers. Password managers are a good idea. You don't memorize the phone numbers, addresses, and birthdays of all your friends. How is storing your contacts any different than using a password manager? But how about we try this? Let's start moving to passwordless authentication. If you're watching this episode, you've likely got a phone. That phone can be used as your FIDO auth. Use an authenticator to sign in. Slowly migrate away from passwords, and you won't have to worry about a provider getting compromised. Just make that change slowly over time, and you'll be better for it. But still use a password manager.
Yay, that was so good. I like, am I deciding, by the way, this week? Or
You're deciding, Audra.
Okay.
You
are deciding.
Well, I'm definitely going to pick Mick this week. You both had great arguments, but I'm going to go with Mick because I love the transition to passwordless because that's something we're seeing more and more of, especially, I think Apple was talking about doing that recently with some of their devices. And, especially how many password managers have had some form of compromise. I don't know if a lot of people are aware, but ultimately having unique passwords for every account is still better than reusing the same password, which is what a lot of people do if they don't have a password manager. So you're much better off to store them, encrypted in the cloud than, having one in your brain that you reuse. So that's what I'm going to go with. Congratulations. And I think the charity this week is the Gavi Alliance because August is National Immunization Awareness Month. So this alliance is a public-private global health partnership, and their goal is to increase access to immunizations globally, especially in developing nations. So,
well, I was prepared for this. I knew how disloyal and untrustworthy you were, Audra, but still, it just, every time it's just like it hurts, if I'm
I'm so
honest.
sorry.
It's okay, but here we go. Proof in the pudding, as discussed. If we can share that over, Lucky successfully donated $60 to the show. So off we go. Wonderful.
All right. I think we have a new clip for the deep dive. Let's roll
deep
that.
dive clip, Mr. Lucky. And now we talk about things that just happen to be on our minds with who's ever here, because we made this up before I knew who'd accept my meeting invite.
Again, can you guess who edited that video?
I can't tell if you're praising or shaming, Audra, but
No,
either way, I'm into it.
Video editing is my passion.
It's so good.
I like the little floating Mick. Do you have any scuba photos, Audra?
I have never been scuba diving. Don't you have to be trained to do that?
Not if Mick did it, I can tell you that.
Look, go to a resort and get certified at a resort. There's like a 90% chance you won't die.
90%.
We're already at 30 minutes, so our deep dive is going to be a little shorter than usual, but it's something we're really passionate in, especially Audra, who is actually the privacy guru for our team. So Audra, what are we deep diving on today? And why are you so scared? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, well, not scared, more concerned, right? So the FTC announced that they're suing an Idaho-based data broker called Kochava for selling geolocation data. This is from hundreds of millions of devices. So the concern obviously is that this data could be used to track people's movements, especially to sensitive locations like reproductive health clinics, churches, shelters, addiction recovery facilities. So the concern over data privacy as it relates to abortion access in particular has been a big topic ever since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. So Kochava said it's been in talks with the FTC. They're working on a function to block geolocation data from sensitive locations, but didn't really elaborate on how they were going to do that. So retailers buy this data then to look at foot traffic for consumers, but there's the concern about other potential use cases. The FTC said that their analysis of the data included precise time-stamped location data from 61 million unique mobile devices just in the previous week, to give an idea of what we're talking about. So Google actually said that it was going to start deleting this kind of data back in July in response to the Supreme Court ruling. And the FTC is exploring the regulation of corporate data practices, especially how, the private management of data and how that intersects with, children or, consumer consent, and also potentially discrimination. And that's not all. There's another story that's related to this. The FCC is investigating the collection of geolocation data from mobile carriers. So they requested information from 15 mobile carriers in July, and they found out that 10 collected geolocation data and provided no way for consumers to opt out. So if you have a mobile phone, you're submitting this data.
I guess that's the kind of what we were talking about in the pre-show is, Mick and I come from a world that, you can't really find me on the internet, for example, between 2014. And that's not a challenge, people. I'm just saying there's not a lot there. I'm sure you can, just to be very clear. Before I came to Splunk, I just worked in a role that, you weren't really putting stuff on the internet. But then we had all these breaches and all of my PII went away, right? And so I've probably gone too far the other angle of just I'm not going to put my social up on the screen and say, no one can hack me because I have a service to do it. But I definitely tend to be a little bit more laissez-faire. But Audra, you've had you are deleting your own data. You've kind of gone through this before in your previous career, seeing that, is it even possible to have one of these on your hand and have privacy?
Well, it's frustrating because, like I said, a lot of these, you don't have an option. In some situations, I was at a store the other day, and a lot of times they'll ask for your phone number or your email when you check out to send a receipt. And I'll always say, do I have to, right? Is there a way for me to do this without giving you my email? And the other day they told me, no, you have to give your email in order to buy what you're planning to buy. And I thought that was so interesting that I had no option. It's either buy this and give my email or don't buy it. And I think there's a lot of situations like that we're coming across, but there are, situations where you can opt out of data broker sites like White Pages, for instance, which is one of the more difficult ones. You can pay companies like Delete Me is one that I use that I like. and they'll actually take the time to go through each of these sites, because there's hundreds of data brokers that collect this data. You could also change the privacy settings on your social media, so that helps prevent data mining.
Yeah.
Don't need to know your birthday, for example. Don't accept friend requests from strangers. Opt
Except
out
on
of
LinkedIn, we'll always accept you. You're not a stranger of the show. So
right. Well, right. That's a little
So you're
different.
saying if I'm in private mode, then I'm safe. Is that what I'm?
Yeah, whatever you can try to, you don't need to put all your information out there. It's unnecessary.
So context for me was the 2020 census. The United Kingdom population is a little under 68 million. So that would be the location data of every person in the UK. It just the scope and size of this is troublesome and worrying, because this, I don't think, is the only firm. And we have conversations, offline where, it's moving in access and just leasing that data. I think the adage that always holds true is, if the service is free, then you are the product. And the product is all of that location data that can be mined and used for ads or not great things.
Yeah, and a lot of these data brokers, they'll say, well, it's anonymized data, right? We take away your name, so it's just your location and that's it. But if there's a GPS location attached to your data, you can actually de-anonymize it in some cases. There was that story not too long ago about a priest who had to resign from the Catholic Church because his geolocation data placed him using Grindr, and that's how they were able to de-anonymize the data, was based on his location, not because his name was attached to it.
And then even just other aspects, it's like 8 years ago, I think, it was Strava, where you had special forces guys who were super competitive and they were turning on Strava, and it's like, oh, why is there suddenly
hey, don't run around
really
the file, ding dong, you can't.
Yeah, it's I'm not saying
you
it's
can't do laps around the perimeter. You can't.
But I am saying that there's this Strava in the middle of the desert that never used to exist, and everyone in there is wearing a uniform. So it kind of goes above and beyond. And we were talking before, in a previous role I had, we did data analytics for marketing companies, and we never bought data, we leased metadata. And so even to your point, Audra, about a company, I remember visiting places and they'd be like, oh, we don't sell your data. And I said, no, but you lease it. I don't want to give it to you. And they were explicitly telling me at the counter, we don't buy it, or sell it, but I knew that we were leasing it, and that was perfectly legal because we didn't ever buy it, we didn't ever store it, we just had access to it to run analytics. So it's an interesting area where things are going through. And then there's a news story that broke right before this that we saw that's unconfirmed, but then that ties into passports, right? The Belarusian hacktivists released every single electronic biometric passport. We haven't looked into it, so it's still to be determined, but
and you can buy an NFT of it. It's really just, I'm waiting for the Photoshop of an ape over one of the passport faces, and I might pick one up.
I'm looking forward to going to DALL-E later today and putting in Belarusian president's personally identifiable information with a panda bear and Putin.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, this is definitely new, seeing data leak then reformatted as an NFT. I've not seen that yet, so who knows what the future will bring. There's concern about biometric data, how that could be potentially used for discrimination on the basis of health.
I think whatever NFTs have to do to stay relevant is the important thing here. Is
well, I think that the internet and social media just have infiltrated our lives to such a large degree over the last few decades, and we have not caught up in terms of privacy. And I'm glad to see the FTC and the FCC investigating this now, but I think it should have happened years ago.
Don't disagree, and I'm sure prime ministers and presidents of Finland agree with you as well. That's a good way to end. This has been wonderful. We're going to be back in 2 weeks or so. I hope you enjoyed the show. I know we went a little bit over, but we did warn you that we had so many exciting news things.
We're really passionate about data privacy.
We're passionate about data privacy. So with that, we're going to do our normal ending of staring awkwardly at the screen until Lucky rolls clip.
Wait, there's a new outro. Isn't
sir.